Hello and welcome to Diecast Diaries. I'm Dan and welcome to my 50th video. I must admit, when I started my channel just about 12 months or so ago, video number 50 seemed an awful long way off, but really pleased and amazed to have got here. And also, given that when I started out I knew that I only had a certain amount of stuff that I had to do videos on, the fact that I've got to number 50 and I've still got plenty of things that I'm intending to do videos on, I'm really pleased about. So for this 50th one, I thought I would concentrate on one of the main ranges that I kind of had in mind to do a video on when I first started out. I've kind of been holding off doing all of these kind of main ranges, straight away. I didn't want to kind of use them all up. I've done a few of the main ones. By main ones, I mean videos including ranges by people like companies like Matchbox, Dinky Toys, and in the case of today's video, Corgi. So the video I'm doing today is about the military range that Corgi Toys put out in the 1970s. Now, unlike Dinky, who obviously had a very big military range from the 50s through to through to the end of the company in 1980, Corgi, although they had done military vehicles, a lot of them, particularly from the 1960s, had been kind of military versions of vehicles from their civilian lineup. Some more convincing than others, it has to be said, and all of them kind of produced in the same US Army livery, regardless of what nationality the actual vehicle was. I only have a few models from that range. They're not as common as the Dinky Toys ones. I don't think they were probably as sought after. They're certainly, as I've just mentioned, not as military as the Dinky models were. And I think they are slightly harder to come by. But this range that Corgi launched in 1973 would be the first one that they did to actually include tanks, like most military vehicles, it has to be said. But this one was quite an unusual range in that it was actually, with the exception of, I think, the very first model, the models were all produced in Hong Kong, under Corgi's supervision, of course. And I think this must have been one of the first cases of an English manufacturer outsourcing its manufacturing to another country. I can only presume it's because labour was cheaper out there. So the models are produced to the same specification, but just unfortunately no longer made in Great Britain. So the range, as I mentioned, it was introduced in 1973 and was in production until 1980. And the nice thing with this one is that, with the exception of a couple of the models, all of them are unique to this range, and all of them, again with the exception of about one, are proper military vehicles. But it's actually the one exception that we kind of start with, and this is, I mentioned, the first one that's the only one that is actually still made in Great Britain. So in 1973, Corgi introduced the Mack tank transporter with Centurion tank, and this was in production from 1973 to 1978. So this truck was one that had been introduced 2 years earlier as part of the normal Corgi lineup, and it was sold with both a tanker trailer and a kind of big box trailer. Corgi obviously decided they wanted to do a tank transporter, and I think thought that this was probably the most appropriate cab. They actually paired it up with a considerably older trailer. I think this trailer was known as machinery carrier. I think this originally dates from the 60s. Obviously, it never was sold with the Mack cab in a sort of civilian guise at all. So these were kind of paired up purely for the military line. I'll just take the Centurion off just while we have a look at the truck. So it is the same cab as done in the normal lineup, except that obviously to make it look military, they've given it this nice kind of dark green paint scheme. Got the kind of military kind of sort of regimental or unit kind of badges on the cab doors. I think it's supposed to be like a sort of knight's armoured gauntlet. But one nice touch they've done with this one is, the bonnet's not the best at staying down, it has to be said, is that they've given it this rather substantial looking brush guard, which I think really does add to the look of the model. It really does kind of make it look a lot more heavy duty. And you see, they've actually, although of course Mack, it's an American truck, but they've decided to do it in British Army markings, and it's got like a British Army style number plate, both on the front of the cab and on the back of the carrier. Plus you've also got the Royal Armoured Corps sort of red and yellow square, same as appeared on a lot of the Dinky Toys models from the 50s and 60s, which I've covered in a previous video. The trailer, it's actually quite an unusual one. As you can see, unlike the sort of Dinky Toys Thornycroft Antar, this one, the ramps obviously aren't going to cover the rear wheels. There's no way the tank can kind of drive over there. What actually happens with these is you pull these forward and the whole rear axle detaches, and then the tank can then obviously drive on board, and then you reattach they fold up the ramps and reattach the axle. So it's quite an unusual one, but that's how the original version of this this trailer works. So I'll just fold the two ramps up, and then you can see it just kind of slots in underneath. Little bit of, there we go. Bit of a fiddle, it has to be said. There we go. It clips into place there like that. The other working feature, as is obviously been demonstrated, it's a little bit too eager, same as on the other versions of this truck, it has a nice opening bonnet and a detailed engine block underneath. And although it does have a habit of springing forward itself, it is actually opened by pushing this little latch in here. I will try and just close it. There we go, like that. But yeah, nicely detailed truck. So as I say, this is the one that's kind of not strictly a military vehicle. There is a chance, of course, that various armies will have used this. It's actually a Mack R series, but I don't think any will have actually used them, certainly not the British Army, or indeed the US Army for that matter, as their kind of main tank transporter, and certainly not coupled with a trailer as kind of old-fashioned as this. But yeah, it's kind of probably the most appropriate truck that Corgi had to convert into a tank transporter. And as you can see, this one is still listed as being, still marked as being made in Great Britain, both the truck cab and the trailer. So that's the Mack tank transporter. Now this was only sold with the Centurion tank. So this was the first of the new models, and this was the first of the models that was produced in Hong Kong. And this is kind of what the sort of most of the tanks in this series were kind of like. They had this sort of same type plastic track, which kind of looks a little bit flimsy, but it's actually sort of pretty robust. A few of these tanks I've had for a good number of years, and in fact at least a couple of which I've had since I was little. Again, would have been involved in a good few kind of battles on the carpet, but I've never known any of these tracks kind of break, even though they might look sort of relatively flimsy, but I think they actually are sort of pretty robust. So you've got all of the bodywork, turret and the barrel are metal, and you've got plastic road wheels and the plastic tracks, and then this end of the barrel here. And all of the tanks had the same working feature. So I think in common with pretty much all military toys of this era, whether, you know, as long any that had like a large gun, whether it was a tank, whether it was a field gun, all had a working firing mechanism, and these Corgi ones were no exception. These ones worked by pushing the barrel in like that, and then each vehicle would have its own little switch somewhere to activate it. In the case of this one, it's the aerial. So you kind of push the aerial down, and the barrel fires. They weren't particularly effective. They came with their own little set of plastic shells on a sprue. I don't have any of the original ones. Obviously, all the ones I've got kind of been bought second hand. But yeah, they were reasonably okay, I suppose. And it's nice to have that feature. But the tank itself, really nicely done model. So it's, as I say, Centurion. Wouldn't have been currently in service by the 70s, but obviously it's a very well-known British tank, one produced by a number of different diecast manufacturers over the years, Dinky included. And it's a pretty nicely detailed one, nice sort of regimental badges on the side there, bridge classification for the weight, sort of nice Union Jack on the side, and a sort of quite a nice realistic looking camouflage, a sort of green and khaki. Whether it relates to any actual camouflage or whether it's just one of Corgi's own design, I don't know, but it looks pretty good. And then you've just got some nice detail. You've got the plastic tow cable attached around there as well. So, as I mentioned, the tank transporter was only sold with the Centurion, but the Centurion itself was sold separately, and that was also in production from 1973 to 1978. Now, one good thing is, I've mentioned in previous videos that a book I've got called The Great Book of Corgi, which lists all of the models that they made through to the early 80s, and as well as giving production dates, it also lists how many individual examples of the model were sold. And it's quite pleasing to see that virtually all of these military models must have been pretty good sellers. So in its lifespan, the tank transporter with the Centurion tank sold a total of 219,000, and the tank on its own sold a further 308,000. So both pretty successful models, you would have to say. So that's the tank transporter and Centurion tank. And the next tank they released, and this is kind of where you can see that the range is kind of slightly all over the place in terms of when the vehicles are from. So in this case, this is the German Tiger tank, so obviously very much a very famous tank of World War II. Then you've got the Centurion tank from the kind of 1950s into the early 60s period. And then other vehicles in the range kind of would have been contemporary for sort of like the mid to late 70s. So yes, this is actually the Tiger tank. This was in production from, again, 1973 to 1978 and sold a total of 315,000 again. So another really good seller. Obviously, a very famous tank. Slightly ironic, given this tank's kind of almost mythical reputation in World War II as being an absolute behemoth, in that this is actually the smallest of all the tanks that Corgi produced in this range, which seems kind of odd with it being the Tiger. But again, all metal, again, sort of same plastic tracks as before. And they've got the nice interleaving wheels that the real vehicle had. Same working feature, push the gun barrel in, and then again it's this one, you push the aerial down for it to fire. And again, you've got some nice detail with the tow cables and the exhaust pipes at the back there. But yeah, really nice. And a nice nice sort of camouflage scheme. Kind of looks a bit sort of like one used in the desert. And obviously that's where the Tiger kind of first appeared. Certainly to the British and the Americans was when it appeared in North Africa. But nice authentic markings. The German tanks often have this sort of big individual vehicle number on the side of the turret, and you've got just like the normal sort of German crosses on the side, and a little sort of divisional badge showing the German helmet there. So yeah, that's a pretty nice one. So that's the Tiger tank. Put that over there. And then in 1974, they released a model of what would have been the British Army's current main battle tank, and that's the Chieftain. And this was in production from 1974 through to the end of the range in 1980, and 277,000 of these were sold. So again, obviously another really good seller, and another one where they've captured the look sort of really well. And this one I would say is definitely in a nice sort of authentic colour scheme, that just being all over kind of olive drab. Captured the look of the tank, I think, really well. You can see it's got the same kind of unit marking as the Centurion, and they've got a nice sort of British Army style number plate again. It'd be nice to know if that actually relates to an actual vehicle. There's obviously a fair chance that it does. Obviously, same again, push the turret in, push the barrel in like that. This one's slightly different. You've got a nice big red button at the back. There you go, push it and it will fire. All of the turrets, I should say, obviously fully traverse, and the guns go up and down. There we go. But yeah, another lovely model. Really sort of nice detail with the distinctive headlights that the Chieftain has at the front there. And then the detail pulley at the back's a little plain. It's unusual that this one actually comes with a tow bar. There is technically something that it could tow, but it would look a bit daft. I'll come to that in a little bit. But there's nothing really that the Chieftain was meant to tow, and it's kind of unusual to see it to see it have such a big tow bar like that. But I suppose it's nice that it does, and you could always incorporate things from other ranges if you wanted to have your tank towing a field gun into battle or something like that. So yeah, so that's the Chieftain. As I say, that would have been the British Army's current tank at the time. And then another contemporary tank, but this time for the US Army, would have been the M60. So this again was in production from 1974 to 1980 with a total of 239,000 being sold. Now this is the first one that I would say where the camouflage colour starts to get a little bit unusual. I don't think I've ever seen a tank in this kind of colour scheme before. It's kind of a combination of a sort of desert colour scheme and almost like an urban colour scheme with it having all this grey on as well. You see some really kind of unusual urban type colour schemes on military vehicles, but surprisingly effective given the right background. So this one just has simple white stars on the side. I'm not sure, that looks like it might just be a sort of a spurious type serial number that Corgi have given it there. But again, they've captured the look of the real tank sort of nicely. You've got the engine vents at the back there, and this very distinctive cupola with the built-in machine gun, like versions of the M60 actually had, and that actually turns independently to the main turret. This one also actually features some kind of nice suspension. You can see the road wheels kind of moving up and down really nicely. I always found the tracks on these ones kind of rolled nicely as well. There was none of it sort of like getting jammed, and also, unlike the kind of rubber tracks on some of the Dinky Toys ones, and certainly Battle Kings, I never found that these came off. You can see they've got the sort of teeth inside that hold them in place. So I did find that these tracks kind of stayed in place quite nicely. Again, same feature. You've got the little button at the back for firing the gun. But yeah, a nicely done model, but as I say, quite an unusual colour scheme for that one. But yeah, so that would have been kind of the sort of US Army's equivalent to the Chieftain throughout the 70s. So that's the M60. put that one over there. Just took it onto the end there. And then we go back to World War II and a bit of a different vehicle with the Russian Su-100 tank destroyer. Now, this is a vehicle based on the chassis of the T-34. Slightly kind of random vehicle, I suppose, for Corgi to do. They didn't do an actual T-34 as part of the range. This is the only Russian vehicle they did. But I have to say, very nicely executed. So this was in production from 1974 to 1977, and 196,000 of these. So slightly less popular than the other ones. But one nice feature for this one, unfortunately, I had a bit of a go with it before doing the video, doesn't seem to be working quite as well. In that, again, it has the same thing with the gun, obviously activated with the little red switch at the back. What it was also supposed to do is the commander kind of goes down into his hatch, and when you push the button in, it kind of did it in two stages. The first thing was that the commander popped up, and then the gun fired. Unfortunately, I couldn't really seem to get that working, so I think you can see it does move about. But yeah, it seemed to be quite difficult to get it to work. Unfortunately, he's not playing, unfortunately. He's gone a bit camera shy. But yeah, that's how it looked before. I'll have a go to see if I can get it to work, but I don't think it's going to. I think the mechanism just needs a little bit of work on it. Yeah, but it was a nice little feature anyway. And again, it's another one, all metal, but you've just got these plastic fuel tanks and obviously the plastic top to the commander's hatch there. But yeah, a nice vehicle that, and nice as well that they've done it in winter camouflage. Kind of gives a bit of variety to the range, and of course, winter camouflage, a perfectly appropriate colour for any of the Russian vehicles from World War II. Obviously, Russian winter being particularly famous and certainly a deciding factor in some regards regarding the German invasion. So, yeah, so that's the Su-100 tank destroyer. We'll put that one over there. And then we go back to sort of, might not have been quite contemporary, might have just kind of phased out of service, but it's the British Army Saladin armoured car. So it's a sort of six-wheel drive armoured car, very widely used by the British Army and a few other armies as well, but I'm not sure whether these would still have been in service into the 70s. Possibly they had, possibly they were, but certainly a good model for Dinky to do. Really sort of chunky model, this one, and I think these wheels, correct me if I'm wrong, might be the case, I'm not sure if these wheels might be unique to this. There could be other Corgi models that use them, but I certainly don't think there are many. But they really suit it, and you've got like nice sort of, I think actually feel like rubber tyres on this as well, which really kind of adds to the sort of feel of the model. You can see there you go, Saladin armoured car. Again, exactly the same firing mechanism, push the gun in, and the little button. Quite nicely disguised on this one. I quite prefer this rather than the other ones having that sort of the firing button highlighted in red. But yeah, I think that's a really smart one. That's the Saladin armoured car. So that was in production 1974 to 1977, and 214,000 sold. So you can see, as I say, generally all these are pretty good sellers. What that does mean is that models from this range are generally fairly easy to come across on the second, on places like eBay and that. Again, obviously condition will vary. The gun barrels, I have to say, obviously they are relatively thin, even though they are metal, so that's one thing to be wary of. And one weak point that they do have is something that I will kind of illustrate with the next model from the range that was introduced in 1975, and that's another World War II one, and this time it's the German King Tiger, so kind of the successor to the Tiger that we looked at earlier. Now, what I was referring to with the weak point is you can see, I'll just borrow the M60, all of the tanks have this same kind of plastic, you can see it's like slightly tapered there, this same little end that was hollow, and that's obviously what you put the plastic shell in, ready for firing. That could quite easily break off, and that's what had happened with this King Tiger. So I bought it with that bit missing, but my dad actually made a replacement barrel end for it using a piece of brass tubing, which I then just painted black. And I think, although you can see close up, it is different. It's not the original piece. But I think certainly from a distance, it looks good, and it certainly you get the feel of the original model. So, but yeah, that is one weak point with these tanks, is that because that is quite thin, it does sort of snap off. You'll come across them on eBay with the end of the barrel missing. Other than that, it's another sort of solidly built tank. Interesting colour scheme with this one. It almost looks like a kind of a deserty one again, which obviously wouldn't be appropriate for a King Tiger, but it's The Germans did use a lot of this kind of reddish brown and sort of like tan colour underneath, so it certainly looks good for a German vehicle, I have to say. There you go, German King Tiger German heavy tank. It does still work, this, I think. Yeah, there we go. And again, it's just got the red firing button at the back there. One slightly unusual thing is that although they've moulded the mount for the hull machine gun, it doesn't actually have a machine gun in place. And it just seems a bit odd, given that the Tiger does, and you can actually see they have done the machine gun on that one. So it's kind of wonder why they didn't bother for the King Tiger. But it's not like a great disaster, really. Other than that, the tank looks really good. And I have to say, kind of all of these models, really, they've captured the looks of the vehicles really well. They're all nicely in proportion. And again, they've got the nice details with the interleaving wheels. Again, such a feature of German tanks. They've captured that look really well. So that's the King Tiger. That was produced from 1975 to 1978, and 191,000 of those produced. So all of these tanks, according to the book, they're supposed to be 1 to 60 scale, and they are kind of roughly, if you look at them, I would say they are all kind of roughly the same sort of scale. But for the next model, also introduced in 1975, we move not only to a completely different scale, but to a completely different dimension, in that we're actually looking at a helicopter. So, as I mentioned, 1975, they introduced this one, which was only ever released or only ever known by Corgi as the Bell AH-1G Army helicopter, which is correct, but it's surprising that Corgi never referred to it by its far more common name of Cobra, as this, of course, is a Cobra attack helicopter. So would very much have been kind of a relatively sort of new aircraft by the time sort of Corgi sort of produced it. This, according to the book, is 1 to 100 scale. Now, this would be produced from 1975 through to the end of the range in 1980, and this one must have been a pretty popular one. There's just over 300,000 of these were sold. Again, I think they've captured the look and the dimensions of the real aircraft really well. Famous for having a really sort of thin, real narrow fuselage, presenting quite a difficult target if it's coming at your head on. I think they've captured that really well. Correct in that it's got just a two-bladed main rotor and the two-bladed tail rotor. The thin tail boom, all this is metal again, including the skids. The only bits that are plastic are the rotor blades and the cockpit canopy and the tail rotor, obviously. But all of that, it's all metal. But one really nice feature with these is the thumb wheel here, which can be used for spinning the rotors. I think that worked really well. Kind of a shame they didn't mould it in green just to make it. I know it's probably stands out, so it's obvious to use as a feature. But I think it would have been looked a bit better if it had been done in kind of a dark green or something, just to make it blend in a little bit more. But you got the US Army or the US sort of national insignia there, and then US Army on the tail boom. But yeah, a really nice one, this. And this one again has a working feature. Now, normally the missiles would be carried under these little stub wings. And on the early versions of the Cobra, under the nose, it was a combination grenade launcher and minigun. Now, Corgi have obviously sort of a little bit of a cheat by deciding to put the missiles underneath the nose, but I still think it looks good. Cobras look odd if they don't have anything under the nose. The machine guns probably would have been a bit too, the sort of minigun and grenade launcher probably would have been a bit too fine to do in this kind of scale. But the fact that they've put the rocket under there, I think that actually works quite well as a substitute. And you can see you've got the sort of launching mechanism underneath, and we'll actually sort of fire this one if we can. There we go. So you can see they're not terribly strong. We'll just get the missile there. But it is nice to have that feature. You can see it's just a simple plastic missile. Now, the Cobra is actually one of only two I've got in this range that are boxed. The other one's the Chieftain, but unfortunately, I've got a rough idea of where the box is, but I would have been looking for ages to find it. So for the purpose of the video, I thought one box would do, because all the boxes were kind of done in a similar style. So this is the box for the Cobra. So they're all done in this same kind of colour scheme. Mentions in 3 languages the main working feature, so rocket firing. But as you can see on the box, it says Corgi, Bell AH-1G, and it's just, I find it strange that they made no mention to Cobra, which I think would have been quite an eye-catching and memorable name for people to sort of see that that's what the real thing was called. It just says die-cast rocket firing scale model with operating rotors and 8 shells. So yeah, this is, as I say, because this one I did get box and it did cost me £10. The labels, but yeah, it did cost me £10, which I thought was a pretty good price for it. Oh, there we go. I knew I'd seen the sticker somewhere. It just fallen off. Let's put that to one side. This one does have the rockets on the sprue. You can see I've just removed one for the purposes of attaching it to the helicopter. But yeah, underneath just details the features there. So the turning rotors, shows you how to load the rocket, and then obviously how to fire it. And then on the back, just details 2 of the models from the range that we've already looked at, the SU-100 and the Saladin. Great military models from Corgi. Well, I mentioned earlier that this was, a range produced in Hong Kong under Corgi's supervision, and it actually says here, made to Corgi specifications in Hong Kong. And I kind of wonder if that was, if they put that on the box to kind of allay any fears, if people weren't used to a British company producing its toys overseas, there might have been some fear as to them not being as high quality, and maybe putting that on the box made people think, oh, actually, no, it's okay, it'll still be up to Corgi's quality, but just not made in the UK. Just a guess, I don't know, but yeah, I have to say the Cobra is a particularly nice one, and as I say, a bit of a departure for other things that they've done in the range so far. So that's the Bell AH-1G. Then we move back to World War II for a German half-track rocket launcher. Well, this is a particularly nicely detailed model. Not strictly, well, the actual vehicle is correct. So this is the German standard armoured personnel carrier from World War II. So it's a Hanomag 251 was what the basic vehicle was called. And then there were a whole host of different variants of it, one of which was a rocket launcher that did indeed mount 6 rocket launchers, 3 on each side, actually known by a nickname of Footstuker. Obviously, you could put down a reasonable amount of firepower. Why I say it's not strictly correct is that it has this frame aerial. So early versions of this that were used kind of in the Blitzkrieg era, in their basic personnel carrier role, often had this. It's actually a frame, it's an aerial for radio. I've never seen the rocket launcher version with this, but having said that, it's a nice feature for it to have. And I like the fact as well that you've got the little machine gun behind the shield and a German soldier manning it as well. So there's some really nice detail on this one. Got a correct Wehrmacht number plate on the front there. Nice detail with the headlights and the sort of tubular front bumper. Again, the interleaving wheels, really nice feature. You can see they've actually got Hanomag SDK, I've said 251/1 semi-track rocket launcher. So really nicely detailed model. This one apparently is 1:54 scale. Not 160, but it's not a million miles away, so it still looks okay compared to the other ones. And then it came with this nice little trailer. Again, it's got the same number plate on the back there. Metal, but with plastic wheels, and then a plastic top in which you will find the rockets. So those 6 red ones are the rockets that this came with. The black things in there are actually Britain's mortar bombs. Obviously just decided to keep them in there for safekeeping. They're nothing to do with the actual vehicle. So these would slot in like so, and then you've just got the tab on the side. Ooh, there we go. That one actually, I have to say, is a little bit more impressive than other vehicles from the range. I'll just pop it back into the trailer. But yeah, I think this is a kind of a really interesting vehicle for Corgi to have done. Reasonably popular, sort of just under 250,000 of these sold. This was another one that was in production from 1975 through to the end of the range in 1980. But yeah, I would say that's not my outright favourite. We'll come to that shortly. But certainly probably my second favourite vehicle from the range, just because I just find it so unique, really, and I love the amount of detail on it. So that's the German semi-track rocket launcher with its little trailer. So I'll just pop that over there. Then we go to the next, or the only other aircraft in the range, and this was the Sikorsky Sky Crane US Army helicopter, to give it the exact title that Corgi gave it. This was produced from 1975 to 1978. Just under 200,000 of these sold. Now this, in real life, is a very large helicopter, so it's no surprise that this is the one in the smallest scale of any of the vehicles from this range, actually 1:145. So it is obviously a real helicopter. Now this is one of the models that was actually had a civilian equivalent in the Corgi range. It was exactly the same, but done in a red scheme. I think it still had the red crosses on the side as well. So it's a heavy lift helicopter built for carrying really large, ungainly loads, widely used in the Vietnam War for recovering downed aircraft. As again, obviously just for carrying sort of larger, bulky loads, heavy artillery, putting that in place and things like that. But one of the things it could carry was this so-called people pod. One of the versions of it, I think, had its own self-contained hospital. So it could just basically drop this into a location. You've got kind of a ready-built hospital kind of ready to go. This does actually detach. So this is all plastic, obviously, but it's quite nice that they kind of did it with this. And it even has a fold-down tail. There's nothing inside, obviously, but it's still nice that it kind of does that. So that's the plastic pod. And that's what the aircraft kind of looked like without it. So quite an ungainly looking thing, but very, very useful aircraft. Kind of a shame that they did the exhaust in red, but I suppose it adds a nice bit of colour to it. You've got the nice sort of yellow bit on the tail boom as well. And similar to the Cobra, you've got the little thumb wheel for moving the rotors, which works really well. And again, you've got the sort of nice 6-bladed main rotor and a 4-bladed tail rotor. So it's some really nice detail with this one. This is obviously quite a fragile model. I would say this is probably one of the more harder ones to get from the range. But yeah, a really nice one. You can see under there, that's where the sort of people pod kind of slots into place. But yeah, that's a particularly nice one. That's the Sikorsky Sky Crane, US Army helicopter. So I was just struggling to reattach the pod. There we go. So yeah, smallest one of the whole range, but I would say another favourite of mine. But my outright favourite is actually the next one. So this was produced from 1976 through to the end of the range in 1980, and it's this quad gun tractor with limber and 25-pounder gun. I just really love the look of this set, and I love the fact that they've also done it in, although it was a vehicle that was used kind of throughout World War II, it was a vehicle widely used in the North African campaign, and I love the fact that that's what they've actually done this one in. See, it's even got the Desert Rats 7th Armoured Division badge with the Jerboa on the wheel arch there. Really nice detail on this one. So this one's actually it's either a Canadian-built Ford or Chevrolet. So it differs from the Dinky Toys one, which was the British version of this, which was made by Morris. So yeah, this is a very widely used version, as I say, built in Canada. But I really like the detail on it. It's quite a unique looking vehicle. It's a vehicle I've always liked the look of. Very sort of unusual looking thing with the big sort of sloping back. So you've got the vehicle for carrying the gun crew. You've then got the limber for carrying the ammunition. And of course, that's where the plastic shells are stored. I like the fact you've got these little opening doors here for putting the shells in the back there. You've got, I suppose, a slight problem in the plastic, and it's nowhere near matching. Whereas obviously, really the whole thing would be the same colour, but it's not terrible. And then you've got what would be supposed to be a 25-pounder field gun. Now, although this is my favourite favourite model from this range, I would say that the gun is probably the most disappointing bit. As I say, it's supposed to be a 25-pounder, which is a very well-known British field gun. Again, another thing that's been done by various diecast manufacturers. Dinky Toys again, Britain's, Crescent Toys, all done versions of it. It's quite a distinctive-looking gun. I would say this is a kind of fairly basic version. It's kind of a shame that, given the rest of the level of detail that the rest of the range had, it's kind of a shame they couldn't just extend it to this. Again, it works in exactly the same way. You kind of push the barrel in. You've got the little lever at the back to fire it. But yeah, but the whole thing does make a really nice set. I like the fact they've got the proper sort of like British Army serial number with L, because it's a lorry. I think that's what the L stood for on these serial numbers. Yeah, just captured the look of the real vehicle extremely well. You can see it's even got an interior. I like the fact they've done that, the hatchway open as well. I think it looks really good. You've got a little tow bar at the back there. So yeah, really sort of smart looking set, and yeah, that's definitely my favourite from the range. I'll just reattach the limber. I'll just put that one to the foreground there. There's with its 25-pounder. Now this was actually, now obviously with all these vehicles being obviously very military vehicles, very difficult to do any kind of variations of them in the normal Corgi range. And as I mentioned, it was only really the Sky Crane helicopter that had that. However, bizarrely, the quad gun tractor was one vehicle that did have an equivalent in the Corgi range. So in 1977, Corgi introduced this. So it was just called Riot Police. And as you can see, it's the quad tractor, but this time fitted with two metal, actually brass, water cannon and a rather nice sort of swivelling searchlight on the top. I'd love to know, and I've never been able to find out, if this is based on a real vehicle. If it's not, it's kind of an unusual one for Corgi to do. And I know that diecast manufacturers are normally kind of quite keen to get as much out of a casting as possible, but you'd have thought if Corgi really wanted to get another model out of this particular casting, they could have done it in a military green colour or something like that with the field gun and limber. But yeah, this kind of makes it look like it was a real one, but I've never found any pictures that suggest it was. Quad gun tractors were one of those vehicles that did pass into civilian use after they'd been sold off as surplus. But the most common usage for them is, they're quite an unusual looking vehicle, and there's not a huge amount of things that you could probably use them for. The most common thing I've seen these used for in civilian life is as a wrecker truck, but obviously with considerably sort of cut down bodywork. But yeah, really unusual one. What's kind of extra unusual with this, you'd think it would be a straight repaint, but it isn't, because as you can see, it's actually had this sort of tow bar added, which I find really unusual because there's nothing that this is meant to tow. So why they couldn't just leave it with the same tow bar as this, unless the casting for this one changed during its production run, but I'm not aware that it did, and it would seem unusual for it to do so. So it does seem kind of really unusual that they actually bothered to change that. But yeah, despite whether it's a real vehicle or not, or purely the result of Corgi's design department, I do like it, and this is one of the few of this particular range that I've actually had since I was little. Really like, just a kind of a very appealing vehicle, despite the fact that it's kind of quite unusual. I do kind of really like it. But yeah, I'd love to know a bit more about that one. But trouble is, Googling it, all that tended to come up was pictures of the Corgi model. So not as popular model. According to my book, in the 3 years that this was in production for, it sold 83,000. But I suppose it is quite an unusual one, bit more specialist, I suppose you could say. But I like it still. But yeah, love to know a bit more about that one if possible. And then the last vehicle from the original Corgi military range, and this is another one produced from 1976 through to the end in 1980. Another very unusual one, and that's perhaps reflected, and again, it didn't sell quite such high numbers, and that's this one. It's a French AMX-30 recovery tank. So again, sort of similar style construction in that you've got the same sort of tracks and wheels, and in this one, similar to the M60, you've got the nice suspension. Although the AMX-30 would have been France's then current main battle tank, it's another one of those vehicles that had various different versions of, and Corgi decided to do the recovery version, and it's a really nicely detailed one. So you've got the sort of working dozer blade at the front, you've got the rotating cupola with the machine gun and searchlight, and then the recovery jib that kind of raises, rotates round, and you can actually lower the hook, which is really nice. Now, the original one actually came with some accessories. It came with a couple of figures, and it came with like a tank gun barrel on like a trestle. So it's obviously being used to kind of repair a vehicle in the field. Unfortunately, because I got this one second-hand and unboxed, it's missing those bits. But yeah, I'd have to get a box one to get those. I think this is, again, one of the slightly more harder to get ones from the range. But yeah, just a really, really unusual one. But yeah, so that was the last of the ones produced. I'd say that was the whole range kind of ended in 1980. Corgi didn't really sort of do too much for military sort of throughout the 80s. But in the late 90s, and this is kind of when Corgi switched from being a toy manufacturer really to making what you would call die-cast models. They actually brought out a range, I believe it was called Fighting Machines, and it was a completely new range of military vehicles, meant, as I say, as models as opposed to toys. But for several of the models, they actually resurrected the castings from some of the models from this range. One of the vehicles was this one. Unfortunately, it's not one I have. I think they did a new version of this. It might only have been sold more in the French market. They also did the King Tiger and the Tiger, which unfortunately I don't have. But 3 of the models I do actually have. So 2 of them were sold together. The first of these was the Saladin. You can see it's exactly the same casting, but what they've done is they've removed the firing mechanism, and it makes it look obviously far more realistic. So there's no working features other than the fact that the turret turns, but it's, other than that, still exactly the same model as produced earlier on. Done in a kind of nice, unusual sort of khaki and green camouflage scheme. I'm guessing it is a real colour scheme. It looks like it's in 7th Armoured Division markings again. So yeah, really sort of nice one. And this was sold in a set with a redone version of the Centurion, obviously in the same colour scheme. So again, exactly the same as the original one, but with no firing mechanism and a kind of a more realistic gun barrel with the muzzle brake on the end there. So yeah, that's quite a nice one. I'll say those 2 were sold in a set. The only other one I've got, and I think the only other one that they did as part of this range, is a very nice version of the M60. Now, unusually with this one, it was actually sold with a Diamond T tank transporter, which made for a nice looking set, but it's odd in that this is a tank that would date from the 70s, the Diamond T being a tank transporter from World War II. So it's a bit of an odd pairing, but I don't have the tank transporter. I have a different version of it from a later range that Corgi did, but I managed to get the M60 on its own off eBay a while ago. And again, it's exactly the same as its original version, but just with a better sort of detailed gun barrel. And I have to say, given that the original version was in quite an unusual colour scheme, this one kind of looks much better. So that's the later version of the M60. So I think these were kind of produced from the late 90s. I'm not sure how long they were produced for. Corgi, of course, have gone on since then to produce a whole host of military vehicles in the kind of quite unusual scale of 1 to 50. It's not really that common a scale for military vehicles, but they've done sort of quite a long range. And there will be a number of these models that, again, I'll be touching upon in a future video. But yeah, so as I say, it's a range I particularly like. I think that I love the working features on them. I kind of love the vehicles that Corgi have picked, and I kind of like the detail that Corgi have incorporated into a lot of the models. But yeah, I just thought it was a nice range to cover. And as I say, this was one of the ranges I was originally thinking of covering when I started my channel, as I say, about sort of 12 months ago. So thought it'd be a good one to do for my 50th video. But I will leave it there to now. I appreciate it's been a bit of a longer video than I've done kind of late. So in the meantime, please do like, share, subscribe and comment, and I will see you all very soon. Bye.